tell in that, the type of genocide, I mean, it's a cultural genocide. There's been a historical genocide in the Middle East that's been going on, beginning of the 18th century. And we have missed this. We have missed, I would say, the proverbial writing on the wall when it comes to Wahhabism, because what is happening today in Europe was very predictable in the sense that it happened before. If you look, very recently, the Baki organization in Washington, manifested in front of the Saudi Arabian embassy because they wanted to defend, the world Islamic heritage, because they have suffered under the yoke of Saudi Arabia and Wahhabism. We don't understand that what terrorists are doing, the ideology that they're following, they're going after churches, they're destroying history, they're reducting Islam, and what they're trying to do is to reformat society, even the very identity of people, how they understand nationalism, how they view themselves within society. So it is not just a terrorist problem. What we have is actually a social problem, a philosophical problem, because we don't understand, I would say, the ramification of this ideology that Western powers have invited in. And that's it's not about refugees, it's not about politics, it's not about immigration.
Okay, that's very aggressively, has a lot of money, and then when we look at the relationship it has with the United States and Western powers here, that what we've already said on this program is almost never ever said in Western media. The word Wahhabism is not even mentioned. It's just Islam, okay? So Adele here, I mean, this is problematic here. The West is being attacked by this ideology, while at the same time, the United States looks at Saudi Arabia and some of the other countries that have this ideology as some of their very closest allies, not in the region, in the world. Go ahead, Adele.
Well, if you look, actually, Saudi Arabia has suffered more in number of casualties from this particular brand and bombings by Islamists more than any countries in the West. It's the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, whose actually ideology and even the flag and so on is promoting terrorism. But let's go back to the definition of terrorism. The definition of terrorism is actually a group or a trend using terrorism to achieve a political end. Now, that definition doesn't quite fit many things actually happening, because we have seen some acts which is pure terrorism for the sake of terrorism, like the 9/11, for example, or like what happened in Nice in France. But if you look at the 7 or 8 acts that happened in Europe over the last 3 weeks, some of them can actually be defined in the new definition of terrorism, but terrorism for the sake of terrorism, because they are actually emulating Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIL. Some is very difficult to understand. Some are actually by pure madness, people who are mentally disturbed, but all of them have actually one factor, which is the competence.
Okay, Catherine,
which is the incompetence of the security forces, like switching off.
The security forces seem to look for other problems here. Catherine, jump in. That's the whole point of the program. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
No, I have to completely disagree, and I'm going to go one step further. I mean, to sit here and to say that Saudi Arabia has suffered from terrorism. Hello, I'm sorry, but have you looked at Yemen lately? Have you looked at Bahrain? Have you looked at what is happening to millions of people being starved to death and bombed to death? Now, when it comes to Wahhabism, I don't like to actually, to kind of. To categorize Wahhabism under Islam, because it's not Islamic. I'm sorry. I know that a lot of people would jump right now and say that what I'm saying is absolutely crazy. It's not, because everything that Wahhabism actually stands for is un-Islamic.
Keep going, Catherine.
What's your
as a Muslim, I just dissociate myself from Wahhabism. I'm sorry. I mean, excuse me, but you have Saudi Arabia has since the 18th century telling people what to think, how to pray, and what to believe. When you talk about terrorism, I'm sorry, but if I recall correctly, Shia Muslims in Saudi Arabia are being oppressed just for the fact that they Shia Muslim. They have been called heretics.
That's a state operation. That's not a terrorism by a terrorist group.
The Heart of Saud doesn't like. But still, the Heart of Saud called itself the custodian of the Holy Mosque of Islam, when it stands against Shia Islam just because Shia Islam recognizes a house which is different than that of Al Saud. I'm sorry. but those kind of behavior, the terrorism that Saudi Arabia has fomented, promoted, and actually ideologically supported across the world. I agree with Prime Minister.
Let's keep the conversation going.
Salafism is the problem.
Okay, that's the problem. Or is this blowback here? Again, we can go back to a Defense Intelligence Agency report of 2012, and they knew all of this stuff was happening. They knew exactly what was happening and did nothing to do about to fight it. And I agree with Max. Plummeting ISIS. It's happening, but it only happened when the Russians got involved and really started clobbering those guys. Okay, for 4 years they just watched. Go ahead, Adele, before we go to the break.
Okay, if we go back to what happened in Afghanistan, which was basically CIA, Western, the Saudis, the Egyptians, and all of them exported their problems of the Islamist activists, radical terrorists, and so on into Afghanistan. Then it came back, created Al-Qaeda, created 9/11, and here Wahhabism actually came back to bite at home. And that's actually what I meant, that they had bombs and so on. The whole Shia and all this business I talk about is a different issue altogether. But trying to repeat what actually happened in Afghanistan, in Syria now, they didn't really take any action until the Russians got involved and the Russian really started hitting. ISIL,
Adele, I have to go to a short break. I'm sorry to interrupt. After a short break, we'll continue our discussion on terrorism. Stay. I included a question on media coverage here. And one of the things I find disturbing, and I probably will get some disagreement now, is that American foreign policy and Western foreign policy towards the Middle East, particularly in this century, I mean, we can go back to imperialism and neocolonialism, but I mean, let's say from the illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003. I mean, this is a great sense of blowback here. And what we have here is and I think correctly you've spotted here, a very radical ideology coming out of a religion. It is not from the religion, it is separate from it. But in the popular mind, certainly in the West, there's no delineation whatsoever here. And I don't see that there's enough examination of the cause and effect, the sequence of events here. When you destroy the stability of so many different societies in a very tightly knit neighborhood here, one should expect these kind of things to happen. And I think it's because the law of unintended consequences, they didn't understand the consequences of their meddling in these societies here. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. I think there's a great degree of arrogance and some form of political self-entitlement where Western powers still believe that they can kind of export their own brand of democracy and impose it on those countries, when we know really that democracy has nothing to do with anything. What they're trying to promote is a form of, military interventionism or just intervention full stop. And I think that's the problem. They have come into the Middle East without really understanding the Middle East, or at least having an idea or, an understanding of what it was, but not what it is in reality. And I think that's the problem. The Middle East is not what it was, in the 18th and 19th century. The Middle East has evolved, has changed. People, very much understand what it is that they want to see happen in their country. They have an understanding of, nationalism. They understand the identity. They understand the power that they do have in terms of, giving legitimacy to a government or not. And I think that's the problem. What you see in the Middle East is a form of grand, I would say, revival, in that people want to be free. People want to see not necessarily the kind of democracy that we have in the West, but maybe their own brand of democracy. They want to be able to choose, they want to be able to decide, which is very important. And what you have seen in Iraq and in Syria, I mean, in terms of blowback, I would say it's not so much the foreign policy that the West has carried out, it's what they have allowed in. And again, I'm going back to this Wahhabism problem, and calling it Salafism kind of give it, a form of legitimacy, I would say. And there's, of course, Deobandi in Pakistan, which is a problem as well. I think that the West has failed to understand that what they have used to kind of help forward and manifest their policies in the West, in the Middle East, is backfiring on a grand scale. Is actually destroying them. It's a cancer.
No.